Are there any questions before we move on to part 3? Okay, great. So part 3 is the pretty much all of the forms and logs for monitoring your food safety program, as well as a complete instructions guide for how to use all of these forms and logs. They are for monitoring to ensure that safe food handling procedures and prerequisite program standards are being met. Part 3 contains the following types of monitoring forms and logs that must be completed accordingly. You'll have some that will be completed daily, some that will be completed weekly, some that will be completed monthly, and some that are as needed. This year, we have added a placeholder in this section for your environmental health inspections from your caterer or food vendor, which are your food establishment inspections reports, to be filed in this section if they're not being kept electronically. If you're not storing them here, you'll need to indicate the storage location in the As Needed Monitoring Forms summary page at the beginning of Part 3. Not all kitchens will need to complete all of these forms or logs depending on the operation you have. You can contact your school nutrition consultant with any questions about what forms you'll need to use. The monitoring logs instructions file has probably been the most overlooked document in the past year. Previously, the instructions for each log were provided with the log itself as several pages before the actual log, so in a way, introducing it. What we did is we moved all of the instructions for the logs into a single file to condense the information since there was so much repetition, and also to help save on printing costs for those who chose to print this information. However, it's kind of seeming that no one is reading these instructions thoroughly. So what we are doing is we have, created shortened instructions and notes on many of the actual logs themselves, but just know that does not always provide a complete picture of how the log should be completed. So please read these instructions before completing the log or providing training on how to complete it. It should answer most of the questions that you have. Please don't just rely on the footnotes and shortened instructions on the log itself until after you've read the complete instructions. They're really just there as reminders. Here you'll see a complete list of all of the monitoring logs and forms in Part 3 of the Transported HACCP Plan template. It's not likely you'll need many of these daily or as needed forms, but we still include them should you have the equipment and capacity to hold foods in cold or hot storage. At minimum, you will still need to complete the following daily and monthly logs with as much information as you can provide based on your operation. And these are bolded here on the screen. Daily transported meals receiving checklist, kitchen assessment, hand sink assessment, and monthly food safety inspection forms, which includes the forms for weeks 1 through 4, as well as the pest control form. You will also want to include copies of the most recent environmental health inspection or food establishment inspection reports that we discussed earlier from your caterer or food vendor in this section. So we'll go over a few of these forms now. The daily transported food receiving checklist for prepared foods must be completed each day the school nutrition program receives and holds time and temperature control for safety, or TCS, foods that are delivered from another school or caterer. Review the list of questions and mark yes or no for each one. If no is marked, include the corrective action taken in the last column. You can also include any notes in this column. This form must be dated and signed by the responsible party, which is the person from your SFA who checks the delivery on that given day. File the completed checklist with the daily delivery ticket and/or production records. If meals are delivered from a commercial school kitchen to another school within the same school food authority, the daily delivery ticket is optional if all required information is available on the daily production record for each site serving reimbursable meals. One more note about this form, I did forget to update the year, so July 2023 is still the most current version of this log. The next monitoring log I want to review is the kitchen assessment. Most of you probably only need to complete the observer initials, wipe, spray on sanitizer, clean up, and potentially the corrective action columns of this form. If you are receiving catered or vended meals, you most likely won't have a dish machine, nor will you be washing dishes in a sink. However, if you are doing any dishwashing, please complete the appropriate columns based on your method of dishwashing. There are a few key takeaways I want to point out from this log. If you don't have the equipment listed, leave that part blank or put NA, such as if you don't have a dish machine. Also, please use the correct units. So degrees Fahrenheit for temperatures, parts per million or ppm for concentrations, PSI for pressure, etc. So this depends on the type of dish sanitizing method you are using. If you are using, or if you are cleaning dishes at all, that would be a temperature method or a chemical method. The last thing on here, most of you probably won't use this column either, but for that split column you see in the middle, the dish, sink, wash, and sanitizing step, the left triangle is for the wash step, and the right triangle is for the sanitizing step. So for example, the left should only be a temperature, but the right could be a temperature if you're doing high temp sanitizing, or a ppm, which is a concentration, which would be chemical sanitizing. The next log I want to review is the hand sink assessment. It is important for all employees handling food, even if you're just distributing an individually packaged meal, to wash your hands before handling food and at other times where hand washing must occur. There should be at least one hand sink near the location where meals are served that employees can use. This includes any catering staff that may be on site to serve meals. They are also required to wash their hands before handling food and at other times where hand washing must occur. I also want to clarify for this log that there's no need to measure the water temperature every day. The instructions state, occasionally use a metallic stem thermometer to measure the temperature of the water so you know what warm water feels like. Afterward, you can simply feel the water if the water is warm rather than measuring the actual temperature. If warm water is available, mark Y. If no, mark N. For the upcoming school year, we've updated the language in the log to clarify these instructions, and you'll see that highlighted here in yellow. Now I'd like to share a few tips for completing monitoring logs successfully. We said this before and I'll repeat it again. Please read the instructions file before you're completing a log for the first time and before providing any training to others on completing a monitoring log. This will help make sure it is being completed accurately and consistently across your team. Make sure to write the month and year at the top of the log in the space provided. This is important for our documentation. We want to know, when these measurements are being taken because we no longer are pre-filling that information. Include units of measure where indicated. As we already talked about in the kitchen assessment log, make sure to note if the number is a temperature or if it's a concentration or something else. If you have multiple pieces of the same equipment, which is probably not going to apply to many of you, but if you do, for example, a hot box or reach-in cooler, make sure that you indicate which log is for which piece of equipment. You could designate each one with a number, letter, or color. So for example, reach-in 1 or hot box A. It may be best to avoid putting a location as the indicator, such as reach-in by office, in case it is too vague or you move the equipment to a new location. It is also a good idea to keep extra blank copies of the log for each equipment or purpose on hand for quickly transitioning to the next month, or if something happens to an existing log and it needs to be replaced. We also recommend organizing the logs in a way that best meets the needs of your school or district. Some examples could be keeping logs for each type of equipment or purpose in a sheet protector and either taping to that piece of equipment or in a certain area of the facility. Or you could put all the logs together in a binder or a notebook that's kept in the office or some other method.